Welcome, listeners. I hope you're having a fabulous day so far. And thank you for taking the time out of your day and really tuning into this special, first episode of our podcast, The Underlying Injustices. In this episode, we'll have a special guest speaker, Ms. Chendareddy, who's the founder of Alumni Tutoring, an organization which you'll hear in just a bit. And in this episode, Ms. Chendareddy and I are just going to focus the general aspect of how the right to education is being violated, very broad, very general, and what we could do as our part to alleviate this situation and this violation. However, in our future episodes, we'll be narrowing down our focus to how this violation is being violated in specific countries. So, Ms. Chendareddy, thank you so much for joining me in our first episode of this podcast, The Underlying Injustices. Before we begin, could you please introduce yourself and explain your relevance to the issue of education?
Hi, my name is Chendareddy, and I'm one of the co-founders of Alumni Tutor, which is a nonprofit organization that pairs high school volunteers to teach and educate elementary students about math, science, and English, and it's for students who seek for extra help, who maybe can't afford tutoring, or just like to learn.
Wow, that's really amazing, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing as a whole. And now that we've gotten the introductions out of the way, let's start off with a basic but crucial question. Why do you believe that the right to education is important?
It's really important because in our world, education means everything because it guarantees opportunities for a better life, a better job. So those who are educated do get better jobs. They have the benefit of living a more prosperous life, while those who don't have the opportunity to be educated, they are not able to really go forward with life because they don't have that requirement, since many jobs require you to have many prerequisites, like being educated, having a college degree, and etc. So I think that right to education really guarantees and predicts your future, and that's why it's so important and why it should be allowed for everyone else.
Yeah, very well said, and I completely agree. Now, let's get to the meat of this issue, the nitty-gritty part. How do you think the right to education is being violated? Could you mention some specifics? Additionally, are there certain individuals that are more vulnerable to this violation than others? Maybe gender, for example?
I think the right to education has been violated by many countries, and I think that's because these countries are globalizing and urbanizing, and they're neglecting and forgetting about these individuals who don't have easy access to education or not able to get free education because of their situation. I think free education is so important, and it's the government's initiative, and it's their responsibility to make sure that every child is educated, and they've kind of neglected this responsibility because I think they've focused on more important stuff, which regards to political stuff, like superficial economic stuff, like funding or satisfying the rich, or public works, and funding that instead of funding public schools and equal education for all.
Right. So you bring up a really interesting point that the government is spending less money on this educational sector than it is in political aspects or, like you said, public works. So now, going off of that, do you think there are some countries or areas where this educational right is more violated than others?
I would say definitely in general underdeveloped countries, and that's because many students and many kids in these countries don't have the privilege that many kids in America do, because in America, even if your economic situation is not the greatest, every child goes to public school, they receive an education, and they get the opportunity to extend their education or do more in life. Well, in these underdeveloped countries, they don't have the money or the supplies or the ability to give education to every single person, because it honestly can be very expensive, and these children do have to help their families in other jobs to help bring in money. So I definitely say undeveloped countries, they don't prioritize that right to education because it's not really seen as something that is that important, but it should be.
Of course, so that leads back to the whole idea of like government spending and how much money is allotted. Like, for example, if we consider, I guess, India to be one of these underdeveloped countries, a lot of government spending isn't going towards education. So as a result, there aren't a lot of public schools that are fully paid by the government like we do in the US. Like, almost all students go to a public school, all of the funding is covered by the government and taxpayers' money, whereas a country like India, most people go to private schools paid by the parents. None of it is covered by the government. And then all the people that don't have the money enough to pay for these private schools, these private institutions, they're just not going to be able to go to school. All of them are likely just working with their parents at whatever job their parents do, most of it being like on the farm work, anything related to that. So as a result of that lack of government spending on education, these students are just staying at home helping with their parents, and most likely they're going to be getting very less to little to no education at all. Now, let's look at the more positive side of this. Let's stop being negative for a while. So, do you know of any efforts that are currently being done to alleviate this social justice issue?
I would definitely say the most prominent organization that's doing the most to ensure free education and universal education to all is definitely UNICEF or the UN, because they believe that education is a right, and they're doing so by going to these underdeveloped countries and making sure that education is a priority, and they're also prioritizing enrollment rates for all children of all levels, girls, guys, everyone, and yeah.
Yes, it's always good to see the efforts being done to resolve this violation, especially UNICEF in particular. They're doing so much. Like, I think I recently saw that they had some effort being done to bring desks to children in southern Africa, I believe. And although it's just a small thing, just desks, you could see the joy it brings to these children. Because previously, without these desks, they were sitting on the ground, they're like just learning from on the ground, and it's just kind of sad to see the cultural shock between the US, where getting a couple of desks would be essentially nothing to these students, whereas just a couple of desks to these children in Africa, you should have seen their faces light up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so do you think that there are some potential ways we could maybe recover from these educational right violations that aren't being done yet? Like, what do you think?
I think it's great that these organizations are doing so much, but I think that in order to have even a bigger impact on the world, as a globe, we have to come together and take initiative on the issue. We have to advocate for governments to recognize this issue, because if they don't recognize it, they're not going to do anything about it. And in order to do so, we have to publicly campaign about it, peacefully protest, bring awareness to the issue, because when we bring awareness to the issue, it brings importance to the issue, and that's how we get the issue to be resolved.
Yeah, you bring a really good point up. Like, the government is just putting education and this violation on the back burner. They're like, okay, we'll just address it later, and it's later, and nothing's being done. It's still on the back burner, and it needs to come to the front. Yeah, so now the whole point of this episode is to spotlight this issue and bring awareness to this issue, which kind of leads into my next question. Why do you think others might consider that the right to education is not being violated?
Some people may not think that education is not a problem, the universal education is not a problem, the right is not violated, because they have that privilege of universal education, and because they have that privilege, they don't focus on others, and they don't realize that there's other people in the world that don't have the same privilege as them, and because of that, they think it's not being violated, but in reality, it is being violated. It's just that it's not something that's part of their world, or it's not in their view, and I think once they get to be more aware about it, they'll be able to recognize that it is being violated, and the only way for them to be more aware is for there to be more public awareness for the issue. There has to be people talking about the issue, advocating for it, and that starts with people. People have to come together to advocate about the issue in order to like let other people know that there is an issue and this is what they have to do to help solve it.
Yeah, exactly. So, see, the reason I asked this was because if we were able to track the root cause of this public's disregard to this violation, we can find a way to work around it and bring this issue to light. And yeah, from what you said, it seems that the root cause really is our unawareness to this topic. Really, we live in this almost perfect little bubble enclosing us, that we're totally unaware of what's going around us. We think that, oh, I have a completely perfect education, I go to school every day, I receive the best learning and education I can possibly have, so obviously there's got to be the same thing for everyone else in other countries, for sure, right? But no, that's not the case. We're in this bubble and we're totally oblivious to what's going around us. So obviously, like you mentioned, awareness and advocating for this issue, like this podcast is doing, is going to be our main way of educating the public and bringing on this change. Whether it be maybe passing out flyers or protesting, all of these ways are just so many opportunities for us to bring about this change and educating the people and the public around us about why this issue matters and how it's being violated. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on this episode of The Underlining Injustice, Ms. Chandreddy. Your input has been very informative. Thank you so much, and have a great day. For our listeners out there, get off of your Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube, and actually go and research this issue, because it's more prominent than you think. So, as usual,